So I just wanted to sit down and do a real quick video. Um, Putting out big, well-edited reviews gets a little tiring, and I really wanted to make something real big for KH2, kind of because it deserves it, kind of because I just want to best myself with every review. So it's going to take more time to get that out than it took to get the last two out, so in the meantime, I'm going to try to do some more low-effort content. Right now, I'm just going unscripted, trying to get my thoughts out there. So welcome to the first AnMiCa Unscripted, and today we're gonna go back to Kingdom Hearts 1. This is kind of an addendum to the first video. We're gonna talk about kind of my leftover thoughts that I didn't feel fit into that video, but I really wanted said. So point number one I really wanted to get out there is sort of the game's structure and how the narrative is put in there. And so the big thing you get with how the game is made, how the story is laid out, is you get a pretty clear rendition of the hero's journey. And if you don't know what that is, the hero's journey is sort of a narrative theory that was made by Joseph Campbell that you see in a lot of fiction. You see it in Lord of the Rings, you see it in Zelda and Star Wars. It's very common, and this is talked about a whole lot, and Kingdom Hearts does the hero's journey because it's very, very popular for fantasy. And so the quick version of the hero's journey is the hero starts at their home, which is Destiny Islands, and that's where Sora is at the beginning of his story, and they go through what Campbell called the threshold, where they go into a new world. And so sort of leaving home and going to the various Disney worlds is like a very literal interpretation of that, of really going to other places. We eventually get to a point in the story where the hero dies and is resurrected, which also very literally happens within Kingdom Hearts. Sora becomes a Heartless, he is resurrected by Kairi. That spawns a whole bunch of craziness in the sequels, but it's very simple for this. This is just how the hero story works. And then he goes out of the threshold and back home. And that's one of the more interesting parts, is Kingdom Hearts doesn't really do this. Sora doesn't come back through the threshold. He actually stays in the fantasy world. And I think there's some stuff we can read from that as an idea. Part of it is it's open to a sequel if our hero doesn't return home. But really, the hero's journey is a cycle. So they could just have him get another journey that calls him off. And that's what happens at the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, is he ends up returning home, but he goes on a different journey that is like Dream Drop Distance, Kingdom Hearts 3, and he hasn't really returned home since then, so there's that. But taken on its own, there's this sort of tragedy about it, and personally I think a tragedy would be getting to that middle point where the hero dies and he doesn't get resurrected, whether that's a metaphorical death and resurrection or a very literal death, like it's a Shakespeare play. There is a sort of poignancy about not ending the cycle. And so going a little further and having the hero not leave the threshold creates a sort of tragedy about the end, which is why Kingdom Hearts End is just really effective and makes a lot of people cry. It made me cry the first time I saw it because it's kind of strong. We also get a pretty interesting treatment for the sort of sword in the game, which is the Keyblade. The Keyblade is the sword, and that's another thing you see a lot in fantasy, is you see the Master Sword, you see Anakin's lightsaber given to Luke, you see Excalibur or Caliburn in Arthurian legend, where the Chosen One has a specific sword, and the sword has its own special properties. And so the Kingdom Key is very clearly that, and typically that's just how it goes, is the sword chooses a hero, or the hero chooses a sword, or whatever, and then that's just the hero's sword. And there's not a question made of that, of does the sword make the hero, or is the hero heroic on their own bounds? We never take Link's sword away and say, okay, what does that make him? We just give him a sword and say, great, hero of time, cool. There's something very fascinating to me about the end of the game, where Riku is revealed to be quote-unquote the real Keyblade Master, or Keyblade Wielder, whichever they use. And for a while we kind of question, what does that mean? Because we know he's not the hero, because he's very clearly like big bad evil now. He has his dark Heartless pajamas on. But for him to have like some kind of divine providence over the key, that there is an interesting question posed by the text in that, where our hero has had the sword and he's been heroic, and that's been the archetypical hero, but now he has all his virtues, but he's stripped away from the sword. Is the hero made by the weapon? And Kingdom Hearts says no to that. And I really said that in the original video, but I didn't really put the thought process behind that, and so I think that was an important detail that I actually missed. I also really skimmed through all of the Disney worlds because I could really give a big, deep analysis of each Disney world, and it would take up way too much of the video, and I didn't think any of it was really on topic, so I saved really all my bits and pieces about that and just put it off to the side and said, I'll talk about it later. So let's talk about that now. So the first world is Alice in Wonderland, or it's just Wonderland. There's something, it struck me the first time I saw it, that the game is doing that I think kind of makes it better than watching the original movie. And you wouldn't really know that unless you were at least familiar with the book. A difference between the Lewis Carroll novel and the Walt Disney movie is the Disney movie is just kind of a simple trip through Wonderland, and weird things happen, and they don't really make a big thematic deal out of it the whole time. And you could read some of that in there, but really, the novel does a much better job of trying to get what its theme is. There's a lot of inner rumination that Alice has while she's falling into Wonderland, while she is growing and shrinking, and is sort of the questioning of the society she doesn't understand, which is Victorian society. And over time, she learns to understand the sort of tricks of Wonderland, and the growing and shrinking stuff she actually utilizes to get into the Queen's Garden, because that's how she gets through the doorknob. And that doesn't happen at all in the movie. She just happens upon the garden after, like, the Cheshire Cat opens a door for her. And so, taking that idea from the book and making it really all the mechanics of the Kingdom Hearts world, I think that's really interesting. The gameplay kind of feels like how the novel ends up feeling. Of you have to understand the pretty confusing layout of the level. You have to know when to grow, when to shrink. You have to know what position the tree needs to be in the Lotus Forest, and all this wacky stuff that feels more like the original Lewis Carroll novel to me than the Walt Disney movie does. And that's pretty weird. And it's really the only world I can say that about. The other worlds end up either feeling more like the Disney movie or feeling like something completely different entirely. And on that note, we have Olympus Coliseum. Now, Olympus Coliseum in every Kingdom Hearts game, I look at it and feel like it just does not evoke the feel of the Hercules movie, because when I think of Hercules, I think of the really jazzy Minkin score, which is just completely absent in Kingdom Hearts. We just have like this grand sort of orchestral music that's just like, welcome to Olympus, isn't it very godlike? And I think it's kind of jarring when you think about it for more than 2 seconds. But what we do get is actually kind of one of my favorite Disney worlds. Hades in the movie has like a bigger like world domination plan that's contrived and lame. And so stripping that away from him and just having be there like, hey, I'm gonna go rig the games now. I'll get you this time, Hercules, is so much more charming. And I think the fact that this pops up in later games and they can make slight variations on Hades throwing Cloud in there, and it feels so much different, and sometimes it feels better, sometimes it feels worse, but I always like it. There's something charming about it. It has its own charm to it. It kind of makes it better than the movie, and they basically just do like the end of the movie plot in Kingdom Hearts 3, and that's really lame because I liked Olympus Coliseum just being the Coliseum and being like the pettiest side thing, like in the corner. And that's kind of what it is. Like, Hades doesn't really care about the door, he just cares about like messing with Hercules. And so that being the side Colosseum world where you do like gauntlets of enemies, that works. That works within the lore, that works within the game. I like it. Something I found really interesting is some thematic changes in Disney worlds. A lot of people point to the Disney worlds and say, this is a lamer version of the movie. Why do I have to sit through this? And really, I think what they do is they strip down the movies and try to focus it more to the Kingdom Hearts plot. And the first game does that really, really well. Probably to a fault. The Disney Renaissance movies had this obsession with our heroes kind of self-actualizing. So like Hercules finding where he belongs, Tarzan trying to figure out who he is, Ariel wants to go on land, Aladdin wants to be the prince of whatever, and Jack just gets bored of Halloween and decides to be Santa Claus. And all of that is just gone in Kingdom Hearts. They removed all of that from their plots. Ultimately, I think Tarzan hides this the best because they keep some of that in there where like they try to teach him with the slides, which is a moment from the movie, and really a lot of the B plot of Tarzan is still there, or like the second half of Tarzan is mostly intact, we just don't have the first half. The second loop of worlds that has Agrabah, Atlantica, and Halloween towns, you get some weird stuff. You have Aladdin without Prince Ali, and Ariel without Prince Eric, and Night Before Christmas has no Christmas in it, and that's weird. That's super weird. But in that, they take away this weird contrasting theme that just doesn't fit within the overarching narrative of Kingdom Hearts, and I think that's pretty smart. Now, I think it takes some of the core away from the individual worlds as individual worlds, but I don't think that's what Kingdom Hearts was trying to do, or at least the original wasn't trying to do that. And I think if you take that for what it is, you don't end up with this problem of being like, why am I here? Why do I have to sit through this? Dan Castellaneta sounds weird doing the Robin Williams lines, and ultimately I look past that and say, it's an overarching narrative, there's bigger fish to cook, so we removed things that were really irrelevant in the grand scheme. Neverland's a little weird, and it gets its own weird rap because it's not Neverland. You never go to Neverland in the world called Neverland. It's just Hook's ship, and they probably should have just called it Hook's ship, but I guess that doesn't include Big Ben, which, I don't know, it's a weird non sequitur. It wouldn't have fit in Neverland on its own, so, you know, it is what it is. My real question is, if we had Neverland, like, where would we really want to go in Neverland? Because maybe there's, like, some boring wood stuff to go through, which is basically what half of Birth by Sleep ends up being. You could go to, like, the Mermaid Grotto, but we have Atlantica in there. There's already mermaids in this game. It'd be weird to have two different kinds of mermaids, and they'd be so completely different. So I think it makes sense to remove that. And, like, what else do you have? Do you have the Native Americans, the really bad stereotype? No thank you. Please, please, no thank you. It's in Birth by Sleep. At least there are teepees in Birth by Sleep. They call that area the Indian camp. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. It's weird. I didn't need the rest of Neverland. I was fine with just the ship. I was fine with just the clock tower. I was fine with how it was. A big thing I didn't talk about was I didn't talk about the actual gameplay at all and the general system. And I think it's really good. I don't have a lot of interest in talking about how the game plays mechanically and like how that compares to the other games in the series and other action games. Other people do that, and I see the value in it because if you want to play a game, it's important to know how that game plays. I am more interested in analyzing the system and seeing how it fits with the narrative. I think Kingdom Hearts is actually a really good example if you want to get a hold of this idea. Kingdom Hearts has two systems it's working with. One is just the basic RPG system of you level up, you get new abilities. being an action RPG, those new abilities can be like new combos or longer combos or new spells and whatnot. And so the growth of your character is very well represented by your character's abilities over time. And it's tangible enough where you really feel the difference, but it's gradual enough where it's not like, oh, I'm just broken immediately off the bat and the rest of the game feels meaningless. So I think that's really good. But the other system is the tech system, and I think it's a more interesting system. It's a system that really isn't in the other Kingdom Hearts games, and that's probably for the better, mechanically speaking. But narratively speaking, there's an interesting effect from having the tech system within the original Kingdom Hearts game. So the way the tech system works is you get experience points from doing specific actions in battle. If you deflect specific attacks, if you use specific moves against a handful of enemies, it will reward you with being better at the battle, but also, the experience points. And so you get this really interesting effect where the player is gaining experience by learning the different enemies and learning their attack patterns and just simply getting better at the game, but also the experience points adds to your character's experience, and it's probably the most parallel that I've seen those two experiences. I don't know if that's quite the right word for it, but the tech system is a good way with literally making character experience and player experience the exact same thing instead of making them two disparate elements in one game. And I think that's a problem that plagues just so many RPGs, that I like how it manifests here so dang much. The last thing I wanted to talk about, which really should have been a part of that original video because it's a huge miss, is Kairi. I didn't mention Kairi almost at all, and she's kind of part of the main trio, Sora, Riku, and Kairi, and I really just glossed over her. She's really important to this plot, and that might be a hot take because Kairi seems so irrelevant now because Nomura hasn't done anything with her for so many games that she doesn't feel like she matters. But in the first game, I think she's very important, but also kind of very problematic, so let's just go ahead and dive into that. So really what Kairi is doing in the first Kingdom Hearts is she exists as motivation for Sora and Riku. Sora wants to find his friends, really being Riku and Kairi. When we see Riku again, Sora just wants to find Kairi. And Riku, he also wants to find Kairi. He wants to save Kairi, he wants to do whatever for Kairi. There's a scene at the beginning of the game that I didn't mention in the original critique, which it's super important to this bit of the plot. So earlier in the game, they introduced the Paupu fruit, which has this sort of myth about it, where if two people share a Paupu fruit, their destinies become intertwined. It's basically code for marriage. So we're given that idea, and this scene starts where Sora and Riku are about to have a race, and Sora is betting that he'll become the captain of the ship, and Riku changes the bet and says, whoever wins shares the Paupu with Kairi. And that's a big thing that the shippers are sleeping on. Ship Riku and Kairi. Someone needs to do that, my god. I've seen Sora and Kairi, I've seen Sora Riku. I don't think I've ever seen Riku Kairi. Shippers, where are you? Anyway, the game continues with that idea of we have two boys motivated by one girl to go save that one girl. And the problem there is that while I think she's important because she is the motivation between these two characters, which I think are the main characters, that really just turns her into an object. And that's not great for the story. And once she's saved, she resurrects Sora and she wants to go help him save Riku, and he says, no, you can't do that. I have a Keyblade, and what are you gonna fight with? But the game didn't have to be written like that. They could have given any excuse in the world to have Kairi fight in the last world and be a party member. Minnie Mouse has light magic in the second game. Kairi has a Keyblade in the second game. Just saying. She could have any shred of agency, and she really doesn't in this game. She has one drop near the end of the game where she does something, and that's kind of it. So the story probably would have been better without Kairi. Our two characters could have been motivated by anything. They're motivated by a girl, and that's not the best. It's not. All that being said, that's the video. Sorry it's not a big review. I promise it's gonna come, but we'll get it out when we get it out. If you haven't subscribed, do so, and like and comment and stuff. I'd really appreciate that. That'd be real good. And I'll see you all next time.